SIG 2-3, it is 12 January 2021. This is the next in the catch up. So here we go. From FortObserver.com, or FortObserver, I guess, .com. Get their newsletter. I don't get anything from it, but it's just good information. So, in focus. 4GW? Fourth generation warfare, key to understanding ongoing conflict. Throughout most of last year, the United States experienced a mostly peaceful, heavy quotations, tongue-in-cheek, a lot of sarcasm, cultural revolution. Now, it's not even a cultural revolution. I mean, there's nothing cultural about that. The results of which threaten to permanently change the political, social, and economic landscape of the country. I've previously described the United States as experiencing fourth generation warfare where the moral and mental planes are the primary battlefields and information is the primary weapon. It's the 12th today. We just saw a slew of people getting, conservatives, Americans getting kicked off of the information superhighways. Parlay got shut down. A lot of the Republicans, and I think this is being covered later on. Republicans who support Trump, or at least trying to get to the bottom of, not even trying to get to the bottom, to expose all the fraud. Something our courts simply refuse to do because they're complicit. Something the Orwellian Department of Justice refuses to do because they're complicit. And what about the VP? And what about the AG? Yeah, this is the key to understanding current events and the immediate future of low-intensity conflict. Nowhere has fourth generation warfare been more apparent than what happened after Wednesday's protest. The one in which Antifa people were bussed in, actually seen. Over the past 2 days, politicians on both sides of the aisle, as well as political pundits, have unequivocally and universally denounced the protest. But not a word of all the stuff that's happened since May. Yeah. In the corporate world, Disney, UPS, Chase, Bank of America, Coca-Cola, and the National Association of Manufacturers, and a host of other organizations released statements condemning Wednesday's protest as an assault on democracy. Observers note, I've repeatedly pointed to corporations and their officers blurring the lines between commerce and politics to support ideological causes, which is part of the main effort in the ongoing conflict. The cultural revolution, there's nothing cultural about it, once again, has weaponized commercial entities. There's been widespread and consistent repudiation of the protests and violence that ensued on Wednesday. Compare this week's reaction to that of Floyd's rebellion. Please. Compare that. Compare this week's reaction to that of Floyd's rebellion last summer, where the same corporations, Democratic politicians, and political pundits ignored, excused, justified, or encouraged behavior that included far greater destruction and violence. Yet actual destruction and violence. Yet much of society defended the behavior because social justice activists have spent considerable time and resources to develop political, social, and commercial influence. Victimhood is the primary tool used to build a moral position in fourth generation warfare. And through the exploitation of victimhood, the social justice movement has been able to reshape the information environment, especially through social media. Ironically, social media is the primary vehicle for shaping the information environment, yet the Trump administration has done very little over the past 4 years to diminish that strategic advantage. For all the claims of being fascist, The Trump administration has done virtually nothing to stifle the speech and influence of the revolution, the Marxist revolution, the Democrat Socialist of America revolution, the Democrats. I mean, there's no difference today. They are simply Marxists, so whatever. Meanwhile, President Trump and his supporters have struggled to achieve the moral high ground. Yet this is exactly where the conflict is being fought in the information space and on the moral battlefield. Trump supporters are most often characterized as the aggressors in society, and the aggressors almost always lose in a fourth generation conflict. The popular reactions to Wednesday's protests, in which Trump supporters were characterized as insurrectionists and political allies in Congress as seditionists, is the direct result of the left's ability to shape the information environment. This is not to say that these reactions are true, objective, or shared by every member of society, yet the ability to popularize the idea that these individuals are fascists, domestic terrorists, and threats to democracy will further isolate Trump's supporters' ability to compete in the information environment. And that's going to be a characteristic of at least the next 2 years of low-intensity conflict. Well, maybe it's because everything that could have been done hasn't been done. Maybe it's because if Trump had the ability to simply go, in the information space himself and release information himself, where everybody could see it and the American public is not strung along for 4 goddamn years, maybe that could have made a difference. And the whole Q thing, that it's got to be that, it's obviously a psyop, obviously, to get a lot of people distracted so that we're not looking at things or something, because that's resulted to a zero. A zero. Everything that could have been done hasn't been done. Nothing's been done. We've been strung along, people. Low-intensity conflict in some. Anarcho-communists, again, Democrats, push for general strike under the Biden administration. Anarcho-communist bloggers posted a strategy of mass labor mobilization as the alternative to the Democrats. Just stop. In order to influence President-elect Joe Biden and congressional Democrats to commit to radical policies. You don't think they're going to do that already? Under the Harris administration? Because you know as well as I do, Biden's out. I give him 6 to 9 months tops. Unless they're going to keep him around as a drooling lapdog for the Chinese. Warning that riots can be put down by law enforcement, they recommended leftists put their energy into a general strike to unite the working class, defund police, and move the country far away from capitalism. Well, if you move the country far away from capitalism the other direction, then that leads to, Democrats. Okay. Observers note there were multiple calls for a general strike in 2020 that all failed to materialize. With Democrats controlling the White House and Congress, there is likely a sense on the far left that concessions could be made from the government with enough social pressure. We've observed a resurgence in calls for a general strike from the far left on social media this week, specifically in response to Democrats calling for bipartisanship. Oh, I'm trying so hard. Under Biden and squad members voting for Pelosi in another term as House Speaker. That's because the American people has been dumbed down so much that they like the idea of servitude. A similar call for mass mobilization on the left and labor movement was published by the socialist magazine Jacobin yesterday as well. Anti-fascist mob vandalizes police station in Oregon following shooting. In other words, the sun came out on the, was shining on the planet somewhere. Approximately 100 black bloc anti-fascists assembled at the Tigard Police Department just outside Portland, Oregon last night in response to an officer-involved shooting on Wednesday. Police shot and killed Jacob McDuff, who was reportedly armed with a knife, after he refused to surrender while struggling with police during a domestic violence call. The crowd vandalized vehicles, businesses, and public property and smashed windows at the police department. One person was arrested and charged with rioting by officers responding to the scene. A quote-unquote bundle of fireworks was allegedly thrown at the mob from an overpass. Observers note, Tigard is a smaller suburb of southwest Portland. Despite the relatively large size of the mob, the damage and response was minimal relative to the ongoing riots in Portland and the response to a similar event in Kenosha. The event, however, does indicate anti-fascist ability to assemble large crowds and willingness to operate in more suburban areas outside Portland proper. Portland Mayor Antifa Ted assaulted by anti-fascists at the restaurant. Oh, I almost felt a tear. A group of anti-fascists confronted and harassed their leader in Oregon, Portland, Oregon Mayor Ted Wheeler. At a restaurant this week, several activists yelled obscenities at him over his recent denunciation of far-left violence and informed him that they will never forget him. One anti-fascist allegedly punched Wheeler shortly after the confrontation. Why would they punch their boss? Observers note, in 2020, far-left groups made numerous threats against Mayor Wheeler over his responses to leftist violence. Wheeler was tear-gassed and harassed by rioters at the Hatfield Federal Courthouse last year, but nothing as directly confrontational as this. Emboldened by ongoing attacks and this assault, far-left groups in Portland could escalate violent attacks on public figures this year. Leftists call for marking Trump supporters and preventative fascism. Anti-fascists on social media and in leftist chat rooms are calling for permanently marking Trump supporters and former administration staff. Some paired a screenshot from the movie Inglourious Basterds, altered to include a MAGA hat, and stated that they should be allowed to live permanently marked, quote, like the rats that they are, end quote. Others called for preemptive beatings of Trump supporters and those on the right earlier in the process in order to prevent in the future what happened at the Capitol on Wednesday. Observers note, anti-fascist Alexander Kontompasis was charged with stabbing a Trump supporter in Albany, New York on Wednesday. Kontompasis has multiple social media posts declaring his allegiance to anti-fascism, but he's just communist, or basically liberal. Far-left groups will likely continue to leverage the Capitol riot to launch retaliatory attacks on conservatives and Trump supporters in 2021. You think it's going to end there? Are you kidding me? Have you not been paying attention to the last 4 years? Another point that's popular on the left regarding the Trump movement is the failed 1923 Beer Hall Putsch, organized by then politician Adolf Hitler and the National Socialist Party. Less than 10 years later, they point out Hitler rose to authoritarian power. They used this piece of history to warn that Trumpism should be extinguished before an eventual return to political power. Kiss my ass. So, let's see, 16 January, this is the weekend events, or the coming events. 16 January, anti-fascist disruption, Spokane, Washington. 17 January, refuse to be silenced, armed march, Washington, D.C. and state capitals. 20 January, 46th presidential inauguration. 20 January, Brown Berets national call to action, multiple cities and states. 20 January, Inauguration Day disruption, Seattle, Washington, Portland, Oregon, Washington, D.C. And 23 January, why even bother? MAGA Victory Parade. Just stop. All right, that's it for that one, and on to the next one. All right, 623 out.